He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
This one's wife. Harry Pothead and the Odour of the penis. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Many of you will be aware that the D-Day celebrations are currently taking place. It was 80 years since those brave individuals brought about the liberation, eventually, of France from Nazi occupation. As a consequence of this, members of the royal family are engaging in celebratory events. The Telegraph reports that the Princess Royal hailed the unwavering determination of the Allied forces as hundreds of parachutists jumped over Normandy on the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. As tributes moved from Portsmouth to the beaches of northern France, the Princess, joined by her husband, Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence, unveiled a statue of a Second World War Canadian Royal Regina rifleman that will tell the story of loyalty, bravery and duty for generations to come, and quite right that it does. The Princess has been Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment since 1982. Speaking of the moment, in 1944, when they assembled across the Channel, awaiting the largest amphibious invasion in history, the Princess said, "One can only imagine the sense of trepidation, anticipation, and probably fear of the unknown." The Princess went on to a service at Bayeux Cathedral and back to the cemetery for a late-night vigil as President of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. It comes after some 400 British, Belgian and US paratroopers took part in a parachute jump, descending into a historic D-Day drop zone to recreate the airborne liberation of Normandy in June 1944. And I must say, having watched the videos of it, it looked spectacular. The King, joined by the Queen, the Prince of Wales, the Prime Minister, and some 500 veterans, also paid an emotional tribute to those who served during the Second World War. The King warned, "We must never forget the service and sacrifice of veterans." He acknowledged that today, 80 years on, it was near impossible to imagine the sheer terror and anxiety that faced the hundreds of thousands who took part in the Normandy landings. But he said, "It was our duty to ensure that future generations understand how their service and sacrifice replaced tyranny with freedom." The stories of courage, resilience, and solidarity we have heard today and throughout our lives cannot fail to move us, to inspire us, and to remind us what we owe to that great wartime generation, he told a commemorative event on Southsea Common in Portsmouth. We are all eternally in their debt. The King delivered a stirring address to the hundreds gathered in the sunshine, overlooking the sea where 80 years ago hundreds of thousands of men had set off for Normandy, so many never to return. His Majesty, 75, who was accompanied by the Queen, read a message that Field Marshal Montgomery, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Ground Forces, delivered to all soldiers on the eve of D-Day. He said, "To us is given the honour of striking a blow for freedom which will live in history, and in the better days that lie ahead, men will speak with pride of our doings." The King said that today the nation gathered to honour the 160,000-plus Allied troops who assembled along the shores where he stood, ready to embark on a mission that did strike that blow for freedom, one that would later be recorded as the greatest amphibious operation in history. He said those who gathered here in Portsmouth would never forget the sight. It was by far the largest military fleet the world has ever seen. Yet all knew that both victory and failure were possible, and none could know their fate. Aircrew flying overhead, sailors manning warships, or troops in assault craft, battering their way through the stormy swell to the shore, whether dropping by parachute, landing in a wooden glider, or taking that terrible leap of faith onto the beaches. All must have questioned whether they would survive and how they would respond when faced with such mortal danger. The King quoted the poet Keith Douglas, who was killed in action 3 days after writing about the embarkation. Mr. Douglas wrote, "Actors waiting in the wings of Europe. We already watch the lights on the stage and listen to the colossal overture begin. For us, entering at the height of the din, it will be hard to hear our thoughts, hard to gauge how much our conduct owes to fear or fury." The King said, "At this remove, 8 decades later, it is a near impossible task to imagine the emotion of that day, the pride of being part of such a great enterprise, the anxiety of in some way not coming up to scratch, and the fear that day being their last." He described how he had met several veterans recently, each of whom remembered with such heartbreaking clarity the sight of those many soldiers lying on the beach who drowned before they could even engage in combat. The King said that such stories of courage, resilience, and solidarity cannot fail to move us, to inspire us, and to remind us of what we owe to that great wartime generation, now, tragically, dwindling to so few. He said it was our privilege to hear their testimony, adding, "But our role is not purely passive. It is our duty to ensure that we, and future generations, do not forget their service and their sacrifice in replacing tyranny with freedom. Our rights and the liberty won at such terrible cost bring with them responsibility to others in the exercise of that liberty. The Allied actions of that day ensured the forces of freedom secured, first a toehold in Normandy, then liberated France, and ultimately the whole of Europe, from the stranglehold of a brutal totalitarianism." The monarch described the truly collective effort of the Allied victory and the many who contributed from so many different countries and religions. As we give thanks for all those who gave so much to win the victory, whose fruits we still enjoy to this day, let us once again commit ourselves always to remember, cherish, and honour those who served that day and to live up to the freedom they died for by balancing rights with civic responsibilities to our country, he said, "for we are all eternally in their debt." It comes amid fears young people are increasingly unaware of the sacrifices made by their wartime generation. A recent survey by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission found only 48% of people aged 18 to 34 recognised D-Day as the date that Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. This rose to 59% when surveyed across all age groups. Now, let us hear from Prince Harry with his words about D-Day. After all, this is a man who served in the army and therefore naturally would have something to say about this historic occasion. Here's what he had to say. Nothing. Instead, this is an individual that would rather spend his time going to other countries on faux royal tours, being led around by his wife utilising the grip of doom. A man who was once well regarded by many people in his home country and has tumbled in popularity as a consequence of his behaviours, influenced and occasioned by his handler, the Narcissist. When you hear those words issued by the King, when you hear the words issued by the Princess Royal, that Prince William was in attendance also, rightfully acknowledging the huge and brave sacrifice that was made by those who fought that day, some never returning, and then you get complete silence from Prince Harry. Is he too ashamed to speak out? Has he forgotten to do so? Why is there silence from him? Yes, he's not a working royal, but nevertheless, given his affiliation with the military and the truly historic nature of it being 80 years since that massive amphibious invasion, one would have thought that Harry Pothead might have something to say even if it's a brief statement released via Sussex.com or Archwell, recognising the sacrifice that has been made, remembering his military affiliations. Yet it is indicative of how far this individual has fallen since he was ensnared by the spider, that rather than recognise what has occurred in relation to those troops, to those that had served, so far, at least, perhaps it will change, but so far, there has been silence. Instead, he'd rather spend his time telling us about the fact that he rubbed cream into his todger and the smell reminded of his mum. Those are matters which are seen as more important to him. After all, he is Harry Pothead and engaged with the odour of the penis. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.